Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to New York. Speak with Dr. Michael Hudson, author of The Bubble and Beyond. Michael Hudson, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Thank you very much, Max.
All right, Michael Hudson, despite interest rates at record lows, the Prime Minister here in the UK has had to introduce a scheme to underwrite 15% of the deposit on properties valued at up to £600,000. What does this tell you?
It tells me that England is doing exactly the same thing that Australia and the United States are doing. Their banks are in trouble, and what they want to do is reinflate the real estate market so that the prices will be high enough to cover all of the bad loans that British banks have made. In Australia, they're giving similar pushes. In the United States, the Federal Housing Authority has said, well, we can lend money, government guaranteed loans to home buyers up to 43% of their wages. So what you're seeing is a huge transfer payment of wages into the hands of the banks, making loans to buy high-priced real estate. And the amazing thing is that in London, just as in America and Australia, they're saying that homeowners are getting rich from the rising price of their homes that the government is pushing up, when they're not getting rich at all. They're just getting further in debt, and it's the banks that are bailed out. So while the London government is pretending to help homeowners, they're really helping the banks.
Right. You started off by saying that the banks are in trouble, so they are bringing in this government-backed scheme. But they're pushing it here in the UK as an opportunity for people to get on the property ladder, as it's called. But as you're pointing out, this is about, once again, bailing out the banks, correct?
That's correct.
All right, let me ask you this. You know, when the government subsidizes the property market and people can use their homes as collateral to go to the bank and take money out, the so-called turning your house into an automatic teller machine, they're subsidizing people who are now part of this new rentier class in the UK. At the same time, Dr. Hudson, they're penalizing people who are on so-called benefits. They're victimizing one group of people that the government subsidizes, but they're lauding another group of people that are also being subsidized by the government. I have called this financial apartheid. They're discriminating against one group of people using finances and using interest rates. Your thoughts?
Well, there's a deception here. You use the term that they use your home like a piggy bank. When you take money out of a piggy bank, you don't owe a debt. You simply have let saving. But what they really mean is, instead of taking money out of the piggy bank, take out a loan, and you're going to have to empty your piggy bank in the future. And the future saving that you do to pay this money that you're borrowing is going to take the form of paying down a debt, not of accumulating money in a bank account. So they, by using the rhetoric to pretend that what they're doing is helping the homeowners, they've turned economic language upside down and made it appear as if people actually have a bank asset when actually it's going into debt. They call debt saving, and that's crazy.
All right, let's talk about the U.S. housing for a second. In the U.S., the property market is also booming, but half of the properties being sold are paid for entirely in cash, primarily from private equity and hedge funds using their own cash, of course, or other people's cash. Talk about this phenomenon.
Well, that's not a bubble phenomenon. That's the actual reverse. Now that the Federal Reserve has lowered interest rates, as you pointed out, to under 1% for bank borrowing, the pension funds and the hedge funds saying, how are we going to make money more than the 1% that we can get in government bonds? So all of a sudden, instead of making loans to people to buy property, they're buying distressed properties, buying them up for at very low prices from the banks. And the way to make money now is by buying a house and renting it out. Well, the same thing is happening in America today that did happen during the bubble. When you have absentee owners buying houses, all of a sudden, what are they going to do? they're going to look around to find somebody who's willing to rent the house so that they can make a profit to cover their current expenses, as well as making the capital gain they want. So the higher that house prices go in these hedge fund areas, the lower the rents go, because now they're looking for somebody to buy for rent. So what you're having indeed is 100% hedge funds coming in. They're hoping now that they can sell out is a capital gain, and in fact, they've made 20% over the last 2 years on the run-up so far. But now the Federal Reserve has the following problem. The economy is not recovering. People are not having enough jobs to pay high rents. So all of a sudden, all these hedge fund purchases need somehow to get the market pushed up so that they can cash out and take their capital gains at the expense of homeowners, at the expense of people who are actually going to live in these homes. And that's what economic policy is all about in the United States right now.
Well, if we look at the recent history of these financial predators going back 5 or 6 years, they were making these no-income, no-asset loans, ninja loans, to people really in a way that was completely asymmetric, if you will, in terms of the risk, because the banks were able to sell that risk on where the homeowners accepted all the risk. They got these homeowners into enormous debt. Then all the banks decided, you know what, we're going to go into debt. We're going to have a banking crisis because we inflated a huge bubble. Then they went in and they illegally foreclosed on these properties. They stole the property from these people that they fraudulently sold the mortgages to begin with, and trading on inside information against their own clients, as Goldman Sachs did. Now what you're saying is 5 or 6 years later, after basically throwing these people out into the street, they end up buying them for all cash with money that they get at 0% interest rate. They charge them rent on people that were living there to begin with, and now they're in a crisis again, which will probably lead to another bailout of the hedge funds like we saw with long-term capital management. Is that about it?
That's exactly what's happening, Max. You've got it.
Okay, so here you have a class of predatory financiers. I mean, in the UK, it's amazing to me that having the experience of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the UK seems like they're going to replicate an enormously flawed policy, and nobody seems to be calling it on them in the media, in the press, or in the City of London. And yet we know that these policies are going to fail. I've said that within 24 months, this UK housing bubble that George Osborne has created will collapse. Do you think my estimate is too aggressive, or go ahead.
Suddenly you changed your language, Max. First of all, you say that the banks have pulled a great ripoff. You're absolutely right. And then you say this is a failed policy. It hasn't failed. It's screwed the people to help the banks. The banks are the people who run the government. That hasn't failed. That's a great success. Impoverishing the country, turning England into Greece, turning America into Latvia. That's their definition of success. That's not a failure. You've got to decide, is this which side are you on?
Well, if I remember my Adam Smith, who wrote Wealth of Nations, this seems to be a repudiation of everything that was talked about during the Enlightenment, and now we have the bankruptcy of a nation using financial weapons of mass destruction, as Warren Buffett has called it, for the express purpose of impoverishing people. Why? Is that wrong?
That's absolutely correct. So if you're going to do the opposite of Adam Smith, what do? You make a big public relations campaign saying, Adam Smith is our patron saint. We're for free markets. And what they mean by free markets is turning Adam Smith upside down. To Adam Smith, as you just pointed out, a free market was one that was free of rentiers. Adam Smith said that the most logical tax was a land tax, to finally begin to recollect what the British landlords had taken after the Norman conquest. But now the free market means free for the banks, free for the landowners to exploit the rest of society and do what Ricardo accused them of doing, grinding industrial capitalism to a halt. So by bailing out the banks and the real estate sector, England, and raising the price of housing and raising the indebtedness of British workers, you can say goodbye to British manufacturing. How can Britain afford to hire workers when they have to pay such high costs for housing?
Right. Now, I want to get your comment to something that David Cameron said recently at his conference party speech. He said that Britain should not be afraid of profits and that profits is not a dirty word. But when I think about companies like Amazon, Google, and Vodafone here in the UK, they don't like profits because if they reported their profits, they'd have to pay taxes, which they don't. So is he just foolish? Is he inept? Is he, what's his problem? Is he just stupid, David Cameron, or is he just a tool of the bankers?
all of a sudden there's a use of the word profit in a different way. You know, in our country, the hotel queen, the Queen of Mean, Leona Helmsley, said, only the little people pay taxes. You can say of Amazon and the others, only the little people make profits. Rich companies don't make profits. They make capital gains. They expense all of their profits, pretending to take them in offshore banking centers. I think either Amazon or Google operates out of Ireland or out of centers just like the oil companies operate out of flags of convenience. So the idea is not to declare a profit on your income. So if you look at the corporate profit statements and you compare them to the national income and product accounts, they're completely different because the government knows that all of these fictitious losses are not really losses. They know that the accountants are making the balance sheet. And when I worked for Chase Manhattan Bank and was trying to figure out what Standard Oil's position was. The Standard Oil treasurer, I said, where are the profits made? Are they made where you produce the oil abroad? Are they made here? And the treasurer said, well, they're made right here in my office. We make them wherever we find that we don't have to pay taxes on them. It's all a just pretend fictitious game. And you'd think that the law says you're not allowed to make a accounting statement that is unrealistic and to do a transaction solely for the purpose of avoiding taxes. And yet that's what most of the corporations do today. They make offshore balance sheet items. They make all sorts of foreign affiliates and banking enclaves for the sole purpose of not reporting profits in the countries where they're high, like Europe and North America.
Dr. Michael Hudson, I want to get your quick comment on something. I've noticed that Apple Computer's got about $150 billion parked offshore. They don't bring it into the United States because they don't want to pay taxes on that money. Here you have Carl Icahn, a corporate raider, having lunch and dinner with the CEO, Tim Cook, saying that we're going to get them to buy back their own stock. He tweets about it after he's bought the stock, and he makes $1 billion doing so. Isn't this just kind of like violating everything anyone would hold sacrosanct about markets and free markets? You've got insider trading, market manipulation, offshore tax avoidance, all wrapped up in one scenario between Carl Icahn and Apple. Is this the most egregious example of corporate malfeasance you've ever seen?
It's an exercise in surrealism. Here you have Apple, which is the most cash-rich company in the world, with over $50 billion. If there's any country in the world that doesn't have to borrow, that's Apple. What Icahn is doing is worse than what you described, Max. He's saying Apple should borrow the money here to buy its own stock. So despite having this huge cash savings offshore, it should borrow here and use the money not to make a profit, not to invest in more research and development, not to buy other companies that are useful for what it's doing, but simply to buy its own stock and make money from money financially. So essentially, you're having the absurdity of Apple borrowing money at the same time that its savings are going way up. This doesn't make any sense at all, except as a tax avoidance measure.
Right. So once again, we're back to only the little people report profits. All right, Dr. Michael Hudson, we're out of time. Thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
It's always a pleasure, Max.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Dr. Michael Hudson. If you want to contact us, please tweet us at Keiser Report. Until next time, Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.